Hey everybody, welcome to the New Left. I'm Z. Today, got Andrew and ABC on, and today we have a guest on, RPM. He does the general strike, a lot of the general strike movement and internet work, and he is just phenomenal. Like I've seen, like, so I've been going perusing through your Twitter feed and everything, and in timeline, and it's just been it's a good time seeing all the generals call for general strikes, the international solidarity. Like, a lot of things are in different languages. It's really cool.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for inviting me. I appreciate this, guys.
Oh, it's no problem. And so today we're going to be talking, we're going to be letting him talk a little bit about general strikes, and then we're going to be connecting everything that we're talking about to the general strikes. We're talking about an LAPD officer who was killed during a mob simulation at his precinct. And then we're going to be talking about the FCC is going after TikTok. They're calling them to announce because there is a security risk with the Chinese getting our information. Yeah, but so first off, RPM, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, well, I am, we try not to make this a leader-driven movement, and I can get into that in a second or two, but
okay.
For lack of a better term, I am more or less kind of in charge of this general strike revolution that we are planning right now. I am the author of the People's Manifesto, which is the action plan to amend the Constitution, to update it, to make it an equitable, fair society for all. And we plan on doing this through a stay-at-home general strike revolution, which will require 20 to 25% of workers joining in striking, not consuming media, not shopping. This could be upwards to a 10-day strike, which is why we need that 20 to 25%. Which will break the government financially and force them to ratify our constitutional amendments to end corruption, war, get Medicare for all, UBI, living wage, early retirement, union protections, co-ops. There's a lot I could go into, but I don't think we have all night for me to explain all the demands. However, the reason we have all of these demands is to get the broadest mass movement possible. Also, these demands are what different groups that have been splintered over the last 50 to 150 years have been fighting for individually. So we're folding all of these different groups, whether they are environmental groups, reparation groups, civil rights groups, union groups, all together with what they have been striking for, unionizing for, picketing for sometimes a century or more. So this is how we are trying to bring more and more people in. It is a solidarity-driven movement where we always tell people, look, you may not agree with all of this, but if I told you, you could get your top 3 to 5 asks, the things that you are most concerned about, whether it be student debt cancellation, whether it be about Medicare for all, whether it be about reparations or living wage or UBI or ending the wars. If I can give you those things, and that means you have to be for those other things, you don't have to care about them. I don't need you to have those as your top priority, but you have to strike in solidarity with everyone, because the only way we are going to get this done is if we all unite. There has been a plan in action since the Nixon administration to splinter all of these groups. This is on his tapes, where they talked about you needed to break up civil rights groups, environmental groups, women's groups, gay rights groups, all to only focus on their own agenda, which they have for the last 50 years. You had times where, you had the Rainbow Coalition in the 80s with Jackson's movement and everything, trying to bring people together. You had certain political movements trying to bring one together, but they've all been splintered. And what we're trying to do is bring them all back to be one massive movement. Now, how do we get people that might not be for those particular things? Everyone is for more freedom. No one's going to be striking or trying to have a revolution for less freedom. They're going to be striking to have more. So what we're talking about is democracy in your workplace, co-ops, having a say in what you have to experience at your work. We're talking about having 12 weeks paid vacation. That's something most people can get on board. What we did is we looked at what other countries have, countries that aren't as wealthy as we are, countries that don't have the resources we have, and say, if that has worked, this can work for our country too. We also looked back at what we had in previous generations before certain things were gutted either by Supreme Court decisions in the recent or in the further back past, where unions were strong, labor was strong, and we're saying we're reclaiming that. This is how you get an equitable society. The other way we do it is to ensure that we tackle all issues, because if you only tackle a few, you're going to be right back to square one within, sometimes I hate to say it, like a year or 6 months. But if you want to be super optimistic, less than a generation. And since we have this climate catastrophe facing us in the next 10 years, and we really only have about a year and a half to address it. And that's serious. I'm not being hyperbole. We have to do things right now. And we have the money, we have the means, we have the technology to do things right now. And if we don't get off our ass and do them, we're not going to have a future. And we're not going to have to worry about a fascist state in the US government. We're going to have to worry about a Mad Max state, which is no state, where everyone is fighting for resources, which is clean drinking water. You're going to lose most agricultural land in the global south, which means you're going to have 1 billion people with mass migration. There is no place throughout Europe, throughout the Americas, that can support that many people coming. So when I say it's complete economic and environmental collapse, I'm serious. You're going to be losing glaciers. We have to get off our ass and do this now. And the only way environmental groups are going to get that done is they have to unite all the people who have priorities that aren't theirs. And there are people that they don't give a shit about the environment. You can listen to them talk and they're like, I don't care. I just want police to stop killing us. I want my rights back. I don't want to have to deal with invasive government in my uterus or whatever. That's fine. We cover all of that too. And when I talk about we go after political corruption, this is key too. Everyone knows that the United States government is corrupt to its core. All human beings are corruptible. We can't change human nature, but what we can do is put the maximum checks on it so we don't have this stuff happen again. Now, that means we are moving towards direct democracy. That means if you have less than 50% approval rating at any point in your tenure in office, snap elections will be called. That means you have public finance. That means you have term limits. That means you have age limits. That means you have all of your financial records and all of your family's financial records have to be made public before you allow to be in office. So this way you do not have graft. We have to tackle everything because we've seen the root cause of all of this corruption. So when I say we go into it, it's an 11-page document. It's extensive, but it needs to be, because you can't have a revolution with like 3 sentences and just hope that they'll, kosher with that. So I'm going to let you guys ask some questions before I just keep going and more and more and more.
Hey, that's amazing. And like you said, usually you see a lot of things called for general strike and then it just ends. And then you're just kind of, or revolution just ends, and you're just kind of like, but what are you supposed to do? It's awesome that this is detailed and it's extensive. One thing, because I've been reading a little bit. As far as mutual aid, can you explain how that would work? Because I know 10 days is a long time, and a lot of people are already like hanging on, just being at home working right now. But so if they like to stay home for 10 days, would there be any access to being able to get funds for them, or?
Well, what we're working on, we have a mutual aid list at the moment. It's ever expanding. We have different regions where people can access something as large as this. In the beginning, it can be centralized, but once this thing starts popping, it cannot truly be centralized when you have something where you're talking about 40 million participants in this in one form or another. The other thing I point out for this is we're trying to do a self-replicating community garden situation where people can start getting food. When we mention the 40 million people that we would need as a minimum for this to work, the way I say that is, it would probably take, and this is just based on when we can value how much money we'd be extracting from the economy, anywhere from 5 to 10 days to break the government. Now, that might seem exceedingly fast for some people, but that's why you need the numbers. Here's the thing. There's no way we can actually have a system of mutual aid where we can cover 40 million people's salaries for 2 weeks, because what we're talking about is literally trillions of dollars that we're going to be taking from the economy in order to make the government fold. I just want to make one real quick point on that. We are doing everything we can to try to mitigate that and mitigate all the risk involved, but we can't give people a revolution without risk. There's always going to be inherent risk. The reason we have the stay-at-home part is because if it's a stay-at-home strike, there is no army or police force in the world large enough to break into everyone's homes and force them to work. You are not a target for the street. We are taking the violence of the state away from you. We are also taking away the propaganda of the state away from you. Because as we always know, whenever there are protests, there are always infiltrators, federal agents that go and break shit and then blame it on protesters to enact emergency laws. And I know we're going to discuss that police death that just happened, because this is what they're prepping for. If you're a stay-at-home strike, they have no weapon against you. The reason we say don't consume media is because nonstop propaganda is going to be rampant. Everywhere you turn, they're going to be telling you this is killing the economy, this is killing people's lives, this is destroying everything, and if you don't get back to work, it's going to be blah, 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 blah. If you don't consume, they have no weapon, because first is the violence of the state. Second is the propaganda arm of the state. And I have to stress this last point. You can't shop when you're at home. Don't go on Amazon. Don't go on Netflix. Don't keep the economy going. You have to shut it all down. When somebody says, what if we just target main businesses like an Amazon, like a Target or a Walmart, I state it has to be a maximum pressure campaign, which means everyone has to feel the pinch. If everyone feels the pinch, the government is more forced to concede quicker. Now, here's what comes after. If this all goes off and they concede, they're not just going to let it slide. As we see now with the Supreme Court decisions, they will bide their time and wait and try to get power again. The strike, as I always say, is actually the easiest part. The hardest part is going to be what comes after, building and maintaining and paying attention. Now, you can kick, the crooks out of government. You can make that equitable society, but you're not going to get to a point where they're just going to roll over and take it and never try to claw back power. That's why you have to be vigilant. But before we run, we have to walk, which is why we build this up, which is why we do the strike, and then we build on to that. But I just wanted to get those out real quick. And as for the mutual aid aspect, like I said, we are trying as best we can to cover it so people have as much support as they can. But if we are talking about anywhere from a 5 to 10 day strike, that's not what people think of when they think about a general strike. When they think of a general strike, they're thinking of a month to 2 months to 3 months, maybe even 6 months. I've heard people say, oh, we need to strike from now until, November. Americans don't have that in them, not just for financial resources. They just don't have that stamina. This is ultimately a game of chicken, and who's going to blink first, the government or the United States? And the government is not going to just be getting pressure from their donors, from the wealthy class. They're going to get pressure from every country on earth, because we control a fifth of the global economy. We are going to be throwing everything into chaos, and they are going to be doing everything they can to stabilize it right now. So, which is why we need that massive movement so it ends in, like I said, a week or 2 weeks' time. Because I know people don't have it in them to do this for a month. And there's no mutual aid system where we can cover 40 million people for a month or 2 or 3 or 4. So all of this was built with strategy in mind. And when we see other people call for general strikes, especially snap general strikes based on, recent decisions or, calls for war or anything like that, that's, I like the energy, but until you tell me how you solve from point A to point B, until you show me how you're going to get those laws enacted with a corrupt Congress, a corrupt Supreme Court, and an ineffectual executive branch, It's just posturing, which is why we have to have constitutional amendments, which is something they can't undo, especially when those same constitutional amendments, I should add, throws them all out of power either through age or term limits. So they're already screwed for that alone. So I know I ranted a little bit, so I'll try the next answer to be more concise.
No, that's perfect. I mean, we needed to be detailed, and I'm sure everyone's enjoying it. I see Gerald Morsi out here. He says he's definitely in. You've piqued my interest. I'm definitely I'm definitely going to be reading this after I get off of this, the complete all of the pages and everything. I like what I'm hearing. So don't feel bad that you can rant as much as you like. Now what I want to do, what we were talking about, like you just mentioned a little bit ago, about the fact that we're going to talk about the LAPD. If we can get that video up real fast. So there was a simulation for a mob in an LAPD precinct, and one of the officers was murdered. He suffered a lot of blunt trauma to the head. So we're gonna watch this video, and then we're gonna talk about that in relation to the general strike as well.
An LAPD officer died today after suffering a medical emergency a few days ago. Officer Houston Tipping was a 5-year veteran of the force. He patrolled neighborhoods around Devonshire, and he was a bike instructor. Last Thursday, Officer Tipping was conducting a bike training class at the police academy. He fell off his bike and struck his head, suffering a spinal cord injury. Tipping was rushed to the hospital and died today. LAPD Chief Michael Moore issuing a statement tonight saying, in part, Officer Houston was a bright and uplifting young man with a full life in front of him. May God welcome him home and comfort his family, friends, and partners. Our work continues in a profession that at times calls for a cost that is so very high. Blessed are the peacemakers.
Yikes. So we were talking about a little bit earlier, and like you said, the violence from the state. This seems that this was a prep for the protests that are happening, and they wanted to simulate what would happen, and they ended up murdering a policeman. So what do you say?
Well, yeah, that's exactly the point. This is why when people say, you got to get in the street, you got to riot, you got to break shit, you got to make yourself targets. And I was like, look, if you look back at history, right, there were 2 instances where you had massive change through nonviolent resistance where people were protesting. You had the Indian independence movement, and then you had the civil rights movement with MLK and all that stuff. What you had that was specific about those 2 movements at points in history was you had mass media, which you didn't have before. So you had the newsreels in the 1940s where you could see British officers clubbing Indians, Hindus on their heads constantly, and that shocked the nation, especially when that was coming right out of World War II. And you had the civil rights movement where you had the invention of television, where you could see the brutality for the first time. The interesting thing now is we all have cameras on us at any given moment, and we can film in real time brutality as it's happening. There's a weird disconnect where people are, even if they see the violence, and we're talking generally about racists, mind you, or fence sitters, they see the violence that is being perpetrated on not just African Americans, but protesters, women, everyone in general, and they will try to justify it in ways they didn't 50, 60 years ago when they saw that same brutality. And so there was that quote that the problem with nonviolence is that it only works if your oppressor has a conscience, and the United States does not, which is true to a certain sense because we've seen, we could all just list the numbers of horrible things the United States government throughout its entire history. But if you take that violent option away from the state, there is really nothing they can do to force you to work. They're prepping for that. I actually knew a guy in the military. He was a 20-year vet, and he talked about that their number one war game they practice in all the training isn't for invasion. It's always for an uprising. And it's always usually for a left-wing uprising. It's never for that right-wing stuff with militias or anything like that. It's always for a protest movement and how they can counteract that. And the reason I mention that point too is when people say a revolution needs to be violent, what that would mean is a civil war. And I don't say that lightly. You're talking about so many different factors in a violent revolution that you cannot control. And here's some of the ones I just throw out to people who may not have thought of them before. If you have a violent revolution in the United States, you're going to get not just different fractions fighting, you're not just going to get the military and the police and all that stuff fighting, you're going to get foreign fighters coming because they are not going to allow the United States to become a failed state. So you're not only going to get Mexico and Canada sending troops, you're going to get England, France, Germany, Iran, China, Japan, Saudi Arabia. Everyone is going to be involved in this because you're not going to allow a country with as many nukes as we have become a failed state. And that's something that's quite different than when we go and make countries a failed state. Another thing, too, is when I said about Americans don't have the stamina for a 6-month strike, they really don't have the stamina for a 6-month, 10-month, 5-year-long civil war insurgency where the fighting goes crazy. Now, maybe you will get a communist socialist country coming out of it. It's possible. Maybe you'll get a theocratic country come out of it. It's possible. Maybe you'll get a worse fascist government come out of it. That's possible too. You might get a splintering of the country. It might be broken up into 2, 3, 4 different regions. You never know. But what I can tell you is this. In all violent conflict, there is mass rape, there is mass murder, there is torture, there is pedophilia, there is environmental destruction. No one with a brain wants that because guess what? The people that say they're itching for that will be the first to die. You don't know what it's like in that situation, and you don't want to know what it's like. The thing about this is you can predict the strike. You either get your demands met or you don't. And that all depends on the numbers. If you don't have the numbers, you're not going to win. And the other thing I point out too is we're not going to call this until we think we have a shot. We're not just going to pick a random date and say, okay, we're going to do it and hope people join up. Because what if we get 1 million people showing up and maybe we get 2 or 3 more bouncing in? Those first 1 million people have to quit after a week because they don't have the means to support themselves. About 2 years ago, you had the Black Lives Matter movement protesting all summer. You had tens of millions of people protesting, not all in the same day, mind you, but cities. I mean, every day in cities, in my city, they would be protesting, like shutting down highways all the time. And what happened? They nominated a segregationist as president, a cop as VP. They increased the police budget in every city. And what, did they rename a few streets? They called them Black Lives Matter Boulevard and stuff. It did nothing. It did nothing. It had the energy. It had the demands. It just wasn't coordinated enough that it made the impact. Now, they all striked on the same day. And I don't just mean marches. I mean grinding the economic wheels to a halt. Then they could have got something done. But they're not going to give it up without a fight. And they're not going to give it up unless you put that maximum pressure where they have no choice but to give it up.
Agreed. Yeah, we saw that energy, and like you said, where did it all go? Went back to the wrong people reading the wrong books, people following the wrong people, going to like even more grifters came out of that, and all the money and all of the energy just went to waste. So,
yeah,
went to Hillary buying Black Lives Matter.
Right.
We got some kids to toss.
And those cops. I mean. The reason we've been arming them and militarizing them like crazy since the 1960s is because we've been afraid of riots or afraid of, civil rights marches. This is all they're prepped to do. They don't solve crimes. They don't prevent crimes. They're just there to keep the masses under control, to keep the rich in power. So this is all they're prepped for when they're driving around with goddamn tanks. They are ready for riots. They are ready for marches. And as we've seen, they don't care about anything. They will murder their own out of a fucking simulation. They couldn't use Nerf bats. They couldn't use Nerf bats to pretend to hit that. They actually had to break some guy's like leg and neck. Like, this is how fucking psychopathic they are.
I don't think people understand how psychopathic the police forces are. And
you can say 40% of them beat their wives, and everyone gets that idea. But do they really understand like just what that is? Like,
and that's violence taken. That's them taking the violence home. That's not
them
talking about
taking it out on their loved ones. For fuck's sake, that's not even taking out on people they like hate. That's taking out on people they supposedly love. And you know, I think we have about 1 million or 1.5. It really depends on how you define a police officer or logistical and stuff like that. So think about that. We're talking about anywhere from 400 to 600,000 people that we give weapons to that beat the crap out of their wives and kids. They're the largest, most messed up gang you can imagine, and we've equipped them to keep the population in control. You'd be better off just giving the Bloods and the Crips weapons and saying, I'm sure you could do a better job. This is how nuts these people are. And I want to make a point about that real too before we got off on it. I don't trust police officers at all. So here's how you get the police reformed. One, you got to get them better educated because most of them are dumb as hell. So here's how you do it. You can't just take anti-violence and de-escalation training. You need to get a sociology degree. Because if you don't understand the areas you are policing, the people you are policing, you don't know squat. Two, you take away their weapons. That's for starters. All trust has been violated, so that gets taken away. You'll notice that in England, they've taken away police officers' weapons, and what they have to do whenever there's a situation is they have to talk people down. Now, what you'll hear from police officers are, you can't do that because everyone's armed in this country. To which I say, if there's a mass shooter situation, which we already saw what they do for that, then people can have arms, but only if they get off their fat asses and actually go in there and stop it, not just be armed to the teeth and just wait as 5-year-olds get mowed down because they're all dickless chicken shits. I do swear a lot, so I hope that's kosher.
Hey, you're fine.
Well, it's welcome here.
Let me see. What I wanted to do next, I wanted to look on a little bit at we have the general strike in Ecuador, and what it says they're on day 12 or as trying to see. Let me get the link up real fast.
Yeah, I believe it's day 12 that they're.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, day 12.
1 second. Yeah. Thoughts on the general strike in Ecuador?
Well, you know, I'm hopeful for it. Look, we're trying to do international solidarity as much as possible. I often say that, you know, if other countries do theirs first, you know, we're cool with it. The reason we're starting with America first is for one very simple reason, which is anytime any country has not even a revolution, but they have a slight left tilt in their electoral politics, we come and do a coup or economic sanctions, or we just bomb the hell out of them. So the only way you can actually ensure that they're able to do self-determination is if we solve our own problems first. We are not the policeman of the world. We are the, you know, tyrant of the world. That's the problem with being basically the sole superpower that imposes our will wherever we go.
I think that is another issue of Western leftism as well. Like, you still have that chauvinism and that imperialism that says you have to, like, they have to do it our way. They have to do it. We want this, but it has to be the way we want it. So you see that, you still see that on like our perceived left as well.
Yeah, I look at this and say, you can use this strategy. You can, because if we demonstrate that it works, you can use it anywhere in the world. But obviously their demands are going to be far different, and it's not our business to dictate what they want for their country, what they want for their people, how they want their land to be governed. That's that, like you said, that's imperialism. We're not for that. We're just trying to say that, yes, this is a way that can work. If they wanted to start it first, and then we could point that to our own country and be like, look, Canada did it, just to say it. But, you know, that'd be great. But I think we'll probably have to start with ourselves first, again, in order to move things on. But we have reached out to a bunch of people. We do have people involved in this that are either expats living in other countries or a few people that are actually in other countries that have been helping us with this too. They're helping obviously with our stuff, but they understand that America is got claws in their countries no matter what. So it's in their own self-interest too.
Yeah, under you, we have ADC is our resident Canadian, one of our resident Canadians in the on the network. So,
well, my father's Canadian, so hello.
Ecuador video. This is day 12.
Chaquiteños, ecuatorianos, apóyense. Sáquenle los pies rápido.
Well, they're stopping production.
It looked like they were very organized in that. Like if you compare it to the George Floyd Black Lives Matters aspect, they didn't have. I'm sure the imperialist soldiers are somewhere there, but there was a combined effort from everyone there of moving whatever items to ensure that solidarity. So I think that's what I mean. When we're looking at that, this is that whole deprogram piece where for years we were all programmed to see that as chaos, to see, oh, we see fire and you see these things not looking green and beautiful, that's a chaotic situation. But that's just based on the cover up of when we're getting that whitewashed media that we end up getting around here. The fact that that's actual what's happening, and I'd like to see that. I mean, I had to like actually tell my brain, okay, fire is good. This is good. What they're doing here is a good thing because ultimately it's the good fight.
Yeah, when Egypt had theirs, the Arab Spring back in 2011, it didn't start out that way, but there were scenes that were very similar to that too. And that was like, okay, that I think that only lasted 11 days before Mubarak stepped down, if I'm remembering that correctly. But then we have to remember too that it was less than a year before the U.S. did another coup and installed another puppet dictator in there when the military, quote unquote, asserted control again. And this is sometimes the problem you get when you are dependent on violent actions holding the line, because that means they have to hold the line the entire time. And the second they don't, all of that is undone by whatever comes in after that. I don't go back and judge how other countries have done it, because obviously I didn't live through that. They all have their own experience. And I can say, yes, some of that stuff worked. Yes, the Cuban Revolution worked. When they were attempting that in other parts of Latin America, by that point, the U.S. got wise to it and they were stopping that so it didn't work because they didn't think Cuba would actually happen. But what I'm saying is I don't think that type of revolution will work here for those reasons I laid out. I'm not saying it couldn't work in other ones, but I don't want it to devolve into what the scenario I laid out before. And the other thing, too, it's very difficult to get some of that class solidarity in the United States, which is why when we have these demands in there, is because we understand people are self-motivated. We can all, wish for that kumbaya situation where we're like, we're going to come together but you know what? That's trying to undo 250 years of propaganda about American individualism and rugged individuality and all that stuff that we have to contend with. When I look at some of those countries, in the global South or in the Middle East that did this, or hell, you look at France with their yellow vest movement. I'd love it if Americans did that the second they got, a gas hike or some other thing that was messing up, the working class, the middle class, and they would riot until they get their demands met. But we're not there, which is why we have to push things to get us to that point. And like I said, riots are, a way, but is it going to be sustained? Is it going to be prolonged? The other thing, too, I mentioned is, now it's not the same in some of those other countries, but like in European countries when they protest, what I mentioned earlier, their police are not armed to the teeth the way ours are. Their police aren't designed and trained to kill their citizens the way ours are. Like, we have to accept that we are living in a different society than other places, and we have to adjust our tactics for that. I think your mic's off.
It is. Agreed, though. Even if I could totally see a situation where, like you said, there will be some people, but like you said, we saw what happened when we tried to get people on board to put masks on. That was like a test of solidarity, and that failed spectacularly. So I don't know about getting like everybody on board for
Well, certainly not for, you had people locked down, but then they lost the steam for that after what, like 2 weeks or a month? Yeah. And then they were like, I'm done with this. I'm bored. I want to go places. And that was for something that was literally killing them in the hundreds of thousands. And then eventually millions. And they just didn't, it didn't matter to them. So again,
it still is, unfortunately. Yeah. No, that's okay. It still is. And that's what we're learning now. Like how we're getting to the fact that what we really learned during the lockdown and the initial pandemic was the fact that we have very self-centered individuals. Like, our human race is awful because of, like you said, the 250 years of whitewashed propaganda that we've been swallowing as a society. And yeah, it's like trying to get people just to give 6 feet of social distance or to put on a mask. It's like, well, here in Canada we have all these people, and I'm sure you guys have them there. Here we've got the political leaders of the opposition riding with them in Ottawa right now, protesting. What the hell are you protesting? We have no regulations. Everything is gone now. So people like myself and my family, who we've stayed home when we had to, we've masked up everywhere we do when we go out in public. We've been vaccinated at the point where we were comfortable to vaccinate, and everyone else who's getting sick and spreading the shit, they're allowed to just wander around. Their lives have not changed in one bit unless they've lost someone. So it's that whole selfish and self-righteous piece that we're really battling. And I believe that, like, with your idea of staying home, it's different than going out, because that going out piece, that right now, like you said, the police are armed. And the other thing that we're seeing, especially with the Amazon union, is the fact that it gets co-opted. So we've got politicians that are co-opting these actual protests and these basically the people versus the patriarchy. But then you have politicians and celebrities co-opting this, basically taking any momentum and taking away that message.
Yeah, that just brought up that other point about why we don't want this to be a leader-driven movement, for that very reason. There's 3 things that happen with leader-driven movements, and we've seen that all throughout history. The first is the most obvious: the leader gets killed. And since I am, quote-unquote, the unofficial leader, I don't want that situation to happen. I also don't like it when somebody says it can be a Hydra situation when one goes, the next one springs up. I'm like, not if I'm going first. Anyways, but the thing is, that's usually the first thing that happens. They'll try to assassinate the leader, and then the movement kind of fizzles away. If that doesn't happen, there's the second option of they do the smear campaign, which is, they either dig up dirt or they manufacture dirt. They do a smear campaign on leader, and then that makes the movement fade away and stuff like that. Or then there's the third option, and that's what ADC just said, which is you have them get co-opted. They get bribed, they get wined and dined, they get offers of power, and everyone is susceptible to this. When someone says, well, I'm pure and I'm not going to be like that, dude, you're a mark right there. Just because you think you're not doesn't mean you're not going to. When I say I don't trust anyone in power, I don't mean anyone in power. I think all power should be questioned, which is why all power should be limited. Now, again, I can't change human nature. This isn't a strike to change human nature because that's not going to happen. You can get to a better world like that with education, with time and everything like that. But in order for us to get to that better society, we have to do this to bring us up to what I say the 20th century. That's how far behind we are. We're not even we're not in the 21st. We're not even in the 20th century. This is how backwards this country is, and we need to move forward, which is still backwards, to get us to the point where we can get to that better society. And I mean, I see that happening all the time when you have elected officials or activists who, again, they get brought in and the allure is too strong, which is why you don't want someone to have that power or be in charge of all those decisions, because what happens then when they do become corrupted? They'll start telling all of their followers or people in the movement like, hey, let's compromise on a little bit of this. We don't compromise, because the second we start compromising a little, and this is crucial, you lose everybody. If I tell somebody, hey, they're going to give us like half. They're going to give us half of our demands. Let's just take it. They might not be the half of demands that people are going for. And all you just said to them is you will sell them out. So when your demands are being whittled away, you're never going to get those people to strike or show solidarity for you again, because you already sold them out. Which is why when we're talking about this new essential Bill of Rights, these aren't going to be individual amendments that are going to be voted on. It's going to be an all or nothing thing. We get it all at the same time, because otherwise, that's the surest way to lose.
I like the no waiting.
So one question I have is that, one of the things obviously that I really like is that things are very detailed, right? In terms of the demands and such. And that, you mentioned that the people who are in on this movement right there fall, they don't necessarily have to agree with everything, just agree with a lot of things. Have you found yourself in some situations where there have been some disagreements? And how have you kind of navigated those things to encourage everybody to keep their eye on the prize and not let some of the other things kind of weigh them down?
Yeah. Well, usually when you'll get people, we usually put that stuff right in our opener saying, you might not agree with all of this. You might only agree with 70%. You might agree with 30%. But if that 30% is your number, those are your asks. Those are your demands. That's what you want for a better world. Would you really throw away those things because of that 70% that probably doesn't even really affect you? So what we'll do is we'll often get people to say, I don't agree with this, and I don't agree with this, but I like all that other stuff. And I'm like, cool, focus on what you agree with. And they're like, well, I think it would go a lot better if we get rid of this. And then I kind of do a spiel about, like, if you really want this to work, you need a broad coalition, you need to have a mass movement, and da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm not going to do that whole spiel again, but I have to do this so many times. And which is why I try to write this out so I don't have to say it all over and over.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's
have
like
a script going.
I have a look. It's there. I'm not going to say
Copy and paste. Copy and paste.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. But the thing is, people people just think, well, no, it should be few limit demands. Like it should just be like a Medicare for all or a student debt cancellation or something of that sort. I've been in contact with two different groups that had a lot of push. They blew up on social media, and they got like 50,000 people joining up overnight, and another got like 100,000, and they got pretty close. But here's what happened: they started whittling down their demands because they wanted to make it broader and broader. And what that actually meant is they were actually losing people, because one point they went from like, we should strike for $20 an hour minimum wage, and like, well, maybe it should be 15. Who's going back? No one's going to lose $5 an hour. Like, that's not how you do it. You go all the way in, because if you're going to get this thing working, you don't compromise with yourself, is what I always tell people. They're going to try to get you to compromise. If you're trying to do a negotiation tactic and you're negotiating with yourself from the jump, you're already going to lose. I mean, we can talk about Democrats, but they're paid to lose. But that's the stupidest way to view it. I say, if you have the power, and we do have the power, and we're using the power, don't settle for crumbs. Get it all. Because another thing I want to point out too, just about that $25 an hour wage thing, that those groups started lowering, and then they wondered why they kept losing more and more people. If our minimum wage kept up with productivity and inflation, it would actually be $28.50 an hour. If you adjusted it for inflation since the 1967 or 1968, I can't remember the exact year. So what we have is that $25 an hour. We have a $2,000 a month permanent UBI. We do not means test it. We have massive taxation, so you do not have billionaires. You do not have people that will make $300 or $3,000 more than the lowest paid worker. It's more of a 10 to 20 to 1, and once you figure all taxation, it's often usually a 10 to 1. That makes an equitable society. That also will reduce crime, because if you don't have extreme poverty, you're less likely to have people desperate enough to do, all sorts of stuff. So really, for the people that are like, I don't want to pay this much, or you want to live in fear, do you want to worry about someone's going to be busting into your house or breaking your shit, or maybe bringing back the guillotines? Because right now, this is the last non-violent option left. People are pissed off. And what I told everyone is true. You don't know what is going to happen if it devolves into that civil war, if it devolves into that violent revolution. There's too many factors. It can't be predicted. You could hope you get a good solution, but there's going to be a lot of bloodshed, and it's not looking good any way you look at it. Whereas this, I say you can have a society where there's no poverty, no hunger, no homelessness. Oh, I should point this out too. We pay for everything. We show how much money the U.S. has, how much all our debt is, how we can afford everything, and still have $50 trillion left over to just pay for everything with interest for the next 100 years. So for anyone who says we can't afford this, I say that's bullshit. That's complete and utter bullshit. We cover it all, because that's an objection we sometimes get. And I'm like, it just means you can't have a society where there are 300 people that own more wealth than the bottom half of all humanity. Right now, the top 10% in the United States own 70% of all wealth. That is more than in any country at any time, at any point in history, more than the pharaohs, more than what happened right before the French Revolution, where again, Marie Antoinette, guillotine, just saying, this was more than it ever existed at any point in history. You cannot allow this to continue. And the rich people know this, which is why they're building those underground bunkers, and they're buying up property in New Zealand to try to hide from the masses and the pitchforks. And I also want to point out one thing for rich people too. The people that built those still have the access codes. They know where they are, and they will sell you out. So you're not actually safe from this. Every time rich people have tried to hide when civilization collapses, they get their teeth kicked in. No, money doesn't mean anything anymore. You're not going to be protected. So you either give most of it away, or you give all of it away and your life too. Take your pick.
Well, you were saying about power, and that really, when we're saying staying at home, I mean, yes, it's not following your ideals in regards to not to doing anything for capitalism. But one of the things that has gained a lot of power these days is TikTok, and it looks like the FCC is catching on that and is trying to mute this and another shot at censorship, because a lot of the leftists like us are on TikTok and are gaining ground, and of course the FCC doesn't want to see that.
As if, and they're saying, I mean, they're using the excuse that China's taking our data when, we have like all these huge ass tech companies who are private tech companies taking and selling our data with no fucking repercussions. So, I mean,
yeah. and that's the thing too, that I point out as well, where we talk about the don't consuming media aspect. It's not just the propaganda. They'll shut down the internet. If you're, once it gets to that point, you're spreading this stuff out, they'll just out and out shut down the internet. Like, even before any Supreme Court decision, you don't have any rights in this country. They'll take them all away on a whim to maintain power. So we're using the social media stuff we have now because obviously we're still in the pandemic. Doing a lot of interface organizing is more difficult because, people don't want to die. But we are moving toward pamphlets. We're doing flyers. We're going to have to go underground for certain things too. Go back to email chains, go back to phone chains, go back to a bunch of other stuff in order to get this message out. And as soon as one thing pops up, they're going to take it away. A lot of people in our group have had that where they've either been banned from Twitter or like kicked off of, other social media things. We actually aren't even allowed on Facebook. We can't actually say the word strike on Facebook. So we had to be very creative with how we use the phrase. And even that, they censor basically all of it. Anytime some of our people try to just post a flyer, it gets flagged as either what's the actual phrase they use? Something suspicious activity or something of that sort. So I don't even have a Facebook link to give you guys because basically it's non-existent. They've cracked down on that so extensive that we can't even use the word strike or or revolution or even some organizing. We couldn't even use general organizing in the descriptor. They put the kibosh on that. So TikTok, I'm not surprised because that's something that they don't have any real regulatory power over. It's something where, people can just communicate with one another. And the last thing the government wants is for people to communicate with anyone without them getting their hands in it. So, yeah, it's disturbing. I hope they lose. I wouldn't bet on it because, again, we've seen what's happened with all of these decisions. So it's best to prep for this stuff now, and then just try use what you can while you can, but get ready for when you can't. That's what I tell people.
Agreed. Let's get that video and we'll discuss a little bit more after it.
It's great to have you. Thanks for the time.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
You talk about collecting searching histories, browsing histories, biometrics, metadata. I guess the first question is, what do you suspect that information is being used for?
Yeah, well, most people look at TikTok and they say, well, what's the big deal? It's just another viral video sharing app. And that's just the sheep's clothing. As you walk through, it is a sophisticated tool for harvesting this data. And one thing that we do know is that right now the CCP is running one of the most widespread data gathering operations out there. And TikTok has repeatedly said, don't worry, your data is stored in the US. What we've come to find out through some of this investigative reporting and leaked documents is, in fact, according to TikTok employees, everything is seen in China. And so while I think that's a national security issue, it's also an issue when it comes to just applying the plain terms of the Google and Apple app stores, which say you have to be clear about who's accessing the data, why are they accessing the data. It has to be only used to improve the service. And it strikes me that a plain application of that in light of this pattern of misrepresentations about data should result in booting them from the app stores.
You've asked for a response by July 8th. And I wonder, have you heard anything from either company yet? And what about the rest of the FCC? What do other commissioners say?
Yeah, the FCC has been really good and bipartisan when it comes to addressing threats from CCP. We've done it from Huawei, we've done it from ZTE. I haven't heard so far from Apple or Google on this. They still have time. But I saw TikTok had a spokesperson that said, well, of course, some data goes back to employees in Beijing, but don't worry, it's on a, quote, need-to-know basis. And I think the type of need-to-know determination that an entity in Beijing beholden to the CCP reaches is vastly different than the one that we would reach here in the U.S. in such that it's no limit at all, particularly when you understand how some of the PRC's national intelligence laws operate. Once it is accessed in Beijing, the idea that there's a clawback or way to control or limit access, it just doesn't make sense.
Commissioner Carr, you're going after TikTok. This is a Chinese company that's operating in America, but what about American companies in China like Apple? Is there a double standard here? In response to a 2017 Chinese law, Apple agreed to move its Chinese customers' data to China and onto computers owned and run by a Chinese state-owned company. Isn't that a concern? Should this be broader ranging? Should lawmakers be looking at this?
Absolutely. I'm deeply concerned about some of the hypocrisy we see from Silicon Valley companies. Again, these are companies that stand up and say, look, we back human rights, we back privacy, and yet in their dealings with China, we see a lot of double standards in terms of they're continuing to invest there, continuing to put U.S. user data at risk. And so I do think this should be part and parcel of a broader look at securing U.S. data.
And in terms of enforcement, just like American companies that operate in China, Chinese consumers can get around that through VPNs. Americans can do the same. So if TikTok is taken off the app stores, couldn't they just use VPNs to download it?
Conceivably, but look, I think we have to start taking some steps. And what I'm doing here is only, one of hopefully many shoes left to drop when it comes to TikTok. The Biden administration is undergoing a review of all apps, including TikTok, and I would encourage them to move swiftly to a conclusion of that review. And there's bipartisan interest in this. Previously, Senator Schumer and Senator Cotton have been on the letter. Everyone from Adam Schiff to Cruz and Blackburn have been on it. So there's bipartisan interest in this, not just from the FCC, but also across the executive branch. And I hope they do move forward quickly. But in the meantime, this is a concrete step that Apple and Google could take.
So yeah, so we're seeing that as we were talking about a little bit earlier, we are seeing a huge rise in left media on TikTok, and it's getting really popular. I mean, some things have like a billion, like there's like a hash. You can look at hashtags and you can see like a billion for things like you can like communism's in the millions, socialism in the millions. People just share, like people are sharing history lessons, conceivably any type of media that you want, but you can like we were talking about, you can find your realm in there, and there's a huge realm for left media in TikTok.
Yeah, that's why they hate it. The last thing the government wants is an educated or at least a questioning population that wonders why things are the way they are. I did notice recently that, not even that recently, but for the last couple months, that there's been a lot of talk about general strike, even before these recent decisions on TikTok. More and more people are actually, talking about it. And they're talking about it on Twitter. They're talking about it in Discord. They're talking about it. Not on Facebook, because, like I said, it gets censored.
Through casual conversation at the bar. Yeah.
It's been a long time coming. I mean, at one point, like a while back, this one train driver said, "Oh, I just don't see the demand for this for me." And I was like, "Oh, I'm pretty sure it's there. You're just not seeing it." But it's there. But see, that's the thing, if your job is more or less secure and, you're feeling comfortable, you might not see the need for it. But right now, I think everyone, whether they're comfortable or not, are realizing they're not going to be comfortable for long. So that's why, I mean, hey, when the leak of the Supreme Court decision happened, there were so many women who were vote blue no matter who, still with her Hillary supporters. They were saying, we need to have a revolution. I was reaching out to all of them because they were even saying things like, we need to do a complete boycott. Don't buy anything. Don't work. Don't do this. They were using everything in our our playbook. And they were even including a couple of our demands too. And I'm like, hey, if you're there, if you're ready for us now, come with, we want you. And I don't care at what point you get radicalized. I don't care at which point you realize this system cannot self-correct, as long as you are on board. Because again, everyone wants a better life. Everyone wants more freedom, not less. And nobody wants to be under the boot of either a corporation or a government. And in our country, it's the same thing.
That reminds me a lot of, so Logan, who is one of the people on PVN, they recently made a statement where they said, some liberals are low-key conservatives, closeted conservatives, and some are misinformed leftists, right? And figure out which, right? And that goes very much to what you were saying when it comes to Roe v. Wade, where suddenly you have people just seeing how fucked up the system is. And that's the time to bring them over instead of being like, dumbass, we told you so, right? And
yeah, it's about raising. It is, in the end, it's about raising awareness, and the consciousness needs to be raised, because people have it in, people do have it in them. They just need to know, and they need to be aware of what they're capable of.
Yeah, that's also why we don't really try to speak in isms, because once you start speaking in isms, people just, their eyes glaze over and they just shut down. You talk about capitalism, socialism, communism, anarchism, and there's so many preconceived notions. There's, again, hundreds of years of propaganda. You're not going to get rid of all of that in a conversation or a speech or even a 10, 11 page, list of things. But what you can do is just start talking to people in ways they understand. One of the ways we do is, like I said, democracy at workplace, democracy in your life. You want direct democracy. You want a more say in your government. You want more freedom, not less. And here's how I get for people who are on the fence about, wages being up or other things like that, or even unionization or co-ops. The way I try to get people to unionize their jobs, I say, hey, look, do you think you're getting paid as much as you're worth at your job? And 99% of people will tell you, no. That's the way you get people. Unless you are, the capitalist boss, no one thinks they're actually being valued at their job. No one thinks they're getting paid what they're worth. And that is absolutely true, because everyone knows it on a fundamental level, whether they read any economic theory or not. If you are making $25 worth of profit for your boss, you're not getting paid that $25. You're lucky if you're getting paid $15, so he can extract that $10 from you. Everyone understands that. They don't need to know about labor surplus value or any of that stuff. They just know that what they make, they don't keep. And that's how you bring people in, because everyone has a fundamental understanding of fairness. Children have it, adults have it, everyone gets it. So if you start talking to people that way, and again, leave the isms behind, because it's easy to fall in bubbles. It's easy to fall in traps. It's easy to be like, well, everyone in my circle believes this. Yeah, well, that's not how everyone else believes. So anytime someone says, we should do this and we should do that, I'm like, recognize what country you live in. Recognize what people you are surrounded with. That might be in your enclave. That might be in your community, but that's not how it works everywhere else. You got to talk to people where they live. And the best way to do that is talk about fairness, talk about decency, talk about justice. These are things people understand, whether they are red, whether they are blue, whether they're centrist, whatever. Now, if there are things in our demands that they can't get behind, they're like, I don't like too much of that stuff. Screw them. Move on to somebody else, because you can spend days, hours, weeks trying to convince someone who's already put up all these walls and they're not going to be convinced, or you can go towards the people that are more receptive, and that's how you organize. That's how you bring people in. You don't waste all your time talking to the guy who thinks, moon men are actually impersonating everyone and we're all reptile people. No. You talk to the person who's like, I don't really think this is the way, and then you just talk to them like a human being. You don't talk down on them. You don't care about how long it took for them to get to this point. They're here now, because nobody unionizes with people or works with people in any situations where they say, hey, What are all your political beliefs? What are all your social beliefs? I can't work with someone if you don't believe every single thing I do. That's not real life. That's online life, but that's not real life. And if you want to win, you have to just get over that. I'm not telling people they got to like everyone. I'm not telling people you got to agree with everyone. I'm just saying when the time comes, you got to strike with everyone. And then we all win. And then we make that better society for all.
Well, I think we're coming up a little bit on time today. Andrew, any or ADC, anything else you want to ask or?
No, I think that you've got a very good game plan. I wish you all the best on it, and you have a platform here to come back and give us updates. We really appreciate the work that you're doing, and we wish you luck on making the future better for all.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to echo and say thank you very much. This was very informative, and yeah, it's great to hear all you're doing.
Is there anything else you want to give people a shout out, like where they can find you, and one last little thing?
We have 2 websites. They are identical, but when we talked about that censorship, that's just in case one gets pulled down. Can you put them up on the screen for people?
Yeah, and it'll be in the description as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, those are the 2. They're identical. They have flyers in the flyer section. So we encourage people to print them out. Any ones you like, start putting them up in your community. We cover everything about how you pay for all this stuff, how we bring things forward, all the demands. We have the Discord link on both of the sites. That's where we come for organizing. We have weekly meetings. We strategize, we have suggestions, all that stuff there. We are doing a couple reach outs to some larger groups. I'm not going to say their names at the moment because we haven't actually had the Zoom conferences with them, but they're coming up, one tomorrow and another one next week. And hopefully we're going to have a bigger one starting in August where there's going to be a lot of ones coming in to try to organize for that. So yeah, if you guys would just check it out, join up, spread the word for as many people as you can, both online and in person. And like I said, flyers are there, send them out. We need more in-person contact. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your coworkers, feel them out. And the way to do it is all just, like I said, say, do you think the government is doing a good job? And do you think you're getting paid enough for what you're doing at your work? And most people would tell you the answers we all know. Oh, and I just saw real quick when someone says about where to put up flyers.
Yes, great question.
You can, we have a list, you can put them up. You put them up on lampposts. You can put them up at libraries. You can put them up at like union halls. You can put them up at college universities. You can put them up at public parks. You go put them up at cafes. You can talk to people that are working there that are talking about unionizing and be like, hey, you should unionize if they haven't already. Why don't you put up this flyer too? So, that's just kind of how you reach it. And they just try to bring people in that way too. Don't forget your offices as well. They might get taken down, but at least people might be able to see them.
All right. Well, RPM, was really good talking to you, and the door is always open. Any news you want to shoot at us or come on and talk, just talk the talk, where you're more than welcome.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate this.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.
You too. All right, everybody. Well, that was another episode of the New Left, and I don't have much going on right now, but we're working on a revolutionary reader video. Me and Andrew will be back on Monday with the new Overlooked. And ADC, what you got going on?
Well, we got the big thing. It just launched about a half hour ago. It is the PVN Road to Labor Day contest. So we want you all to join us, all aspects. We're trying to grow. We're trying to grow honestly here. We're not trying to use other people's message or other people's picture or videos and reviewing that crap for cheap likes and cheap shares. We're not doing that. We're 100% honest. I mean, we have RPM on, and we're letting them share their stories. We're not muting anyone. It's legit. So that's why what we want from the PVN, and we want you to join us in solidarity. We want to reach 1,000 YouTube subscribers. I know we're at about 224 right now, so we got a really long road to hoe there. But I think we can do it. We want to get 1,000 Twitter followers, 500 followers on TikTok before they shut us down, and we want to do that before 11:45 p.m. Eastern on Monday, September 5th, which is Labor Day of this year. And for everyone who joins us at the contest page is in the description there. You will be entered to win a PVN prize package of including one of the new PVN coffee mugs, which was designed by myself and Felice and others. Z, you got a book for that's going to the group.
I haven't quite decided which book yet, but I'm going to be donating a book, yes, for that.
Well, and we know your library is immense and it's full of great knowledge that you've utilized in Revolutionary Reader. So if you guys like that, I mean, always go and like that and watch the videos, but you'll get one of those books that is going to help educate. It's not going to be, again, it's not going to be fluff. We're not trying to do anything to this isn't a scam. We're not grifting like others. This is 100% trying to do this organically. Already we're at 224 subscribers on YouTube organically. We want to get that up to 1,000 organically, and we want to give one lucky comrade a chance for a prize pack with some cool merch. I mean, like the shirts that I wear, it's all stuff that is ethically and ethnically produced by my core supplier with Baller Gear, which, if you guys are wondering, people over profit 100%. You can go and order stuff, including the PVN mugs and t-shirts at ballergear.ca/collections/PVN. However, none of those orders will be even looked at until Tuesday, because all of our staff at both distribution centers in Canada and the US are now off until after July 4th. So that's how we take care of it. When you order from other places, you don't know where it's coming from. I will guarantee that this stuff is coming from companies that actually care about their employees as much as the PVN cares about our comrades. So yeah, join us on the road to Labor Day. We want to do this. We want to grow with you. And if you got guests that you want us to have on, connect with us. That's that follow on Twitter. That's that follow on TikTok. That's the subscribe. Email addresses, all our contact info is on the link tree. If you go to the link tree, you actually get 2 entries into the draw. So you go to the link tree, you get 2 entries. You go on TikTok, you get 3 extra. You follow us, you subscribe to us on YouTube, you get 4 extra. Follow us on Twitter, you get 3. So ultimately, you could end up with like 12 entries, but just by sharing your stuff and all the email and your contact info. Number one, we're using it to be able to confirm our winners, but it's also going to have you added to the upcoming PVN newsletter full of information from all our shows, all the updates, all the stuff, because all of us are, well, I'll speak on behalf of myself. I'm very last minute in regards to sharing information. This would help us get the information to you in a timely fashion, so you could all join us and plan your schedules around that, as opposed to getting the messages at like 4 o'clock on the Thursday before the 7 o'clock show. So that's it from our side. We've got a thing I'm working on, the People's Manifesto, the Mutual Aid Manifesto for Alberta. We'll have that launched. I'll do a whole thing on the Left, White, North on that, and maybe even a panel on that to discuss what that's going to be for Alberta. And it's very similar to what RBM is doing there in regards, but it's more focused on the mutual aid, with the idea of trying to change the political system a different way. So we'll give you updates on that. But yeah, right now, go to the link of the contest, enter to win. It's going to be great prizes, and we'll have more information on those prizes once they're all confirmed. But right now, we can tell you it's a mug and a book, and then other stuff, and approximate value $300 US.
All
right. There's my spiel. There's the big sale pitch for everyone there. So
well, they heard it here first.
We'll let her go.
I heard it here first, and we'll start and we'll start having links up on all of our sites, and everyone will see all the advertisements. But until next time, we'll see y'all on me and Andrew will see y'all on Sunday, and we'll see you next week for the panel.